Hey guys, it's JC Theater Yu-Gi-Oh here today, and I'm coming at you guys with something more discussion based, a little more fun, a little more get to know me maybe. So there's been a trend going around the past week or so of this template that was posted by Card Quest Inc. on Facebook that kind of went Yu-Gi-Oh viral. A lot of higher subscriber Yu-Gi-Tubers as well as a lot of smaller Yu-Gi-Tube channels and of course just regular Yu-Gi-Oh players have all decided to post this template online, and it basically says it has a category for every type of Yu-Gi-Oh monster card in the game, and you just pick your favorite out of all of them, and then the bottom right corner has the overall favorite monster that you have. Now I'm just going to start off this video with letting you know that that overall favorite is going to be a separate monster than the rest of the list. I'm not too sure if the original intention of that spot was to be like the top of all the monsters listed on the list, or if it was just overall your favorite monster, but I'm gonna make it an extra addition since I want to have as many spots open as possible so I can name as many cards that deserve it in my opinion as possible. So without further ado, let's just get into this. So starting off, I'm gonna say my favorite Link monster has to go towards Platinum Gadget. Platinum Gadget's interesting because it is a pretty good extender, and I'm not sure if it was actually the first, but it was one of the first Link monsters I actually noticed that had the clause that it couldn't itself be a Link material. I believe it's the turn it's summoned. That kind of made it to where it was actually, in my opinion, a way to bring out a monster that kind of mattered as opposed to just bringing out a monster to kind of Link climb into a Link 3 and then further on. Especially in Master Rule 5, I find Platinum Gadget to be even a better Link monster because now you don't have to kind of get it out of the extra monster zone as soon as possible. So its effect where it can't be used as a Link material isn't as restrictive as it was in the past. Ultimately, I'm a sucker for machines, so Platinum Gadget definitely had to be my favorite Link monster for this list. If you guys have ever seen my very first Yu-Gi-Oh video I've ever posted on YouTube, which was my top, I think, 5 or 6 choices of what archetypes needed a Link monster in like the next Link Vrains pack, you might know that I have quite the fascination with Amorphage monsters. Because of this, I had to, of course, naturally pick an Amorphage monster for my top Pendulum monster pick, and it has to go to Lechery. I think Lechery's effect, specifically targeting spell effects that can't be used, for me personally is very, very useful, and I always found the artwork on top of the effect to be very, very good, and Lechery just has to be my favorite Amorphage monster, and therefore, even though it's not the most competitive of the bunch, it's my favorite Pendulum monster. And I have to give a special honorable mention, of course, to the Dynamis archetype. I'm pretty sure I'd pick like the T-Rex if I had to choose one from there, but Amorphage beat Dynamis by just a little bit, so there it is, my favorite Pendulum. The title of my favorite Xyz monster has to go to none other than Cyber Dragon Infinity. Now, you can technically count Nova in this because of course you have to make Nova in order to climb into Infinity, but ultimately, I remember getting a copy of Cyber Dragon Infinity back when it was on the pricier side of things, back when it didn't have any reprints, and I remember just loving the card, and I do have an affinity towards machines. I've never been a super huge fan of Cyber Dragons. I'm more leaning towards hero monsters if we have to pick any one like archetype where like I'm a big fanboy of. But ultimately, Cyber Dragon Infinity, the fact that it's such a strong card and it can be teched into other machine options, since a lot of machine decks do have some rank 5 options, I just personally really like Cyber Dragon Infinity for its usefulness and its effect overall. Despite me choosing Cyber Dragon Infinity as my top choice for favorite Xyz monster, this was probably the hardest category to choose because Dante, Traveler of the Burning Abyss, as well as Zodiac Trident are both cards that represent their own archetypes. You could argue maybe Rat Pierre for Zodiac, but ultimately these two cards, I find these two archetypes, both the Burning Abyss archetype and the Zodiac archetype, to be two of the most interesting and overall unique gimmick archetypes. And of course, they definitely have seen a lot of meta relevance over the years, but ultimately, I just really, really like those archetypes, so I have to give those two Xyz monsters an honorable mention for sure. For Synchro monsters, this is probably my oddest pick because no Synchro monster screams out at me, but one in particular definitely comes to mind when I think of my favorite Synchro monster, and that is Void Ogre Dragon. Now, Void Ogre Dragon, I remember pulling it from like the Zexal collection tin, I believe it was from, and it was just such a cool artwork and interesting effect, and even though I never really got into Infernities, the deck that it was most played in, I definitely thought it was very interesting, and honestly, when I first got the card, I was quite bad at Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm still not that good, but I found that its effect would come up more than usual because I did commit so many resources to my board. 5Ds will always hold a special place in my heart for the fact that it definitely kind of was the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime that came out when I was like the most cognitively aware, because when I was a kid watching like the original Duel Monsters and stuff, I never really understood many of like the deeper plot lines and stuff like that, but 5Ds definitely I watched as an actual full-on anime viewer. And because of that, Stardust Dragon, honorable mention, just because Stardust Dragon is such an iconic card for 5Ds, and I had at one time a few pages in my collection binder dedicated to all the Stardust support and everything back when I was really a fanboy of it. Though I do like a lot of different fusion archetypes, I think the one fusion monster that really stands out to me is Frightfur's Sabretooth. It's such a cool card, it's such a cool boss monster, and overall, Fluffles and Frightfurs were one of the first like fusion archetypes that I really kind of focused in on and tried to build, and so this card just kind of, for me, encapsulates that deck and overall makes it as my top fusion monster. For my favorite ritual monster, I have to give it up for Saravis, the Ancient and Ascended. The fact that it's not only a ritual monster, but a hand trap that can be used in decks where you don't even run the ritual spell for it, definitely attests to the fact that it's quite techable. And honestly, I've always thought it was a very decent card with a pretty good effect. I've seen it run in some Burning Abyss deck lists and stuff, but for the most part, I find it's always been kind of underrated in a sense. Honorable mentions definitely go to the Megalith and Necroz archetypes. Megalith I find are too new, and their support that's coming out in, I believe, Eternity Code, once we get that, I might find them to be more of a favorite of mine because that definitely brings the deck to the next level. And then Necroz, I've always been fascinated with them, but to be honest, they came out and they were super hyped when I wasn't really into the game, so I don't have that super personal connection to Necroz, even though I do see why so many people do like the deck. My favorite normal monster is actually Goblin Calligrapher. There's something about the artwork that definitely just kind of gets to me. I think it's so cool and interesting. It's just like a level 1 vanilla monster that can't be used in many strategies other than some niche strategies that of course like kind of use it interchangeably with some other cards. Like Skull Servant could be used, which has its own like deck surrounding it. Ultimately, Goblin Calligrapher is just such an interesting card. There's not much else to say about it. It's a normal monster. Ultimately, it's just up to the artwork kind of for normal monster picks. Interesting note, it's the monster depicted on Fake Trap, even though they look nothing alike, and I hate the artwork for Fake Trap, so that's something. Chemicritters are definitely an archetype that I think will one day be strong if they ever manage to print Gemini support that kind of breaks the mechanic, because ultimately Gemini's mechanic in general makes cards inherently weak and kind of unplayable. Carbo Crab is my pick because it's not only a foolish burial but also a search for Gemini monsters. So ultimately, like I said, Geminis one day, if they print anything that breaks Geminis, I'm here for it, and I'm waiting with my Chemicritter core to see what happens. I've never been really into tunes, but I do have a Toon Blue Eyes White Dragon. I don't think it's first ed, but it's like the secret rare print from whatever set it came out with, whatever old set. It's not in the best condition either, but ultimately it's cool. It's Blue Eyes, so this is probably the weakest pick of mine because I don't really care about many Toon monsters. Great Longnosed, despite its very phallic-shaped nose is actually my favorite spirit monster. I specifically remember pulling it from a pack I received on Christmas from my cousin as a present, and it was the first spirit monster I've ever seen. So it was just something about that moment where you see like a new type revealed, especially because I wasn't like up to date with any Yu-Gi-Oh news at the time or anything. So just like pulling something from a pack and it having something with its game mechanic you've never seen before, there's just something about that experience that kind of just rushes back whenever I see Great Longnosed. Though I do like ABCs, Torque Toon Gear is probably the most underrated union monster in my opinion. Underrated might not be the right word because I understand it isn't too usable, but basically it's a tuner union that when it's equipped to a machine monster, it makes that monster gain 500 attack and defense and it becomes a tuner itself. Not only that, but it is a light machine monster, and ultimately I just feel like it has, as many other Yu-Gi-Oh cards do, it has some major potential for future support if anything comes out that it can really kind of be abused with. For the longest time, and even now, Penguin Soldier has definitely been one of my favorite cards in general. Way back in the day in starter deck Joey, I believe it's from, Penguin Soldier, definitely that super rare, that old school super rare where the background's just so simple and clean, but when it's holographic, it just looks so cool. And its effect to me, even now in a way, I understand it's slow because it's a flip monster, but its effect is still so good, being able to bounce back 2 monsters to the hand. It's just a classic, very good, very iconic monster for sure. Like I mentioned earlier with Stardust Dragon, Junk Synchron definitely is another monster that kind of encapsulates the essence of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds. Since its first inception, I definitely noticed that it was a cool monster with a very decent effect, and ultimately it's the card that kind of makes the other Junk Synchro monsters, and I just personally really think that's a really cool, iconic tuner monster, so that's why it's my favorite tuner. You may have noticed I skipped the effect monster slot because I feel like that's the widest pool of monsters other than the overall favorite, so I figured I'd save that one for second to last. And though this might come as a surprise but might not, and it kind of dates me as a newer player, or at least someone who's very interested in newer Yu-Gi-Oh!, Aleister the Invoker is my favorite effect monster. I never really thought about it until I actually sat down and made this list, but he alone represents overall the entirety of the invoked archetype, and honestly, Aleister is just a cool monster, and he's the only main deck monster you need for the invoked deck, so he just kind of carries a lot of weight on his shoulders and is definitely a very important card, especially to me. For those of you especially who follow me on Instagram, I've mentioned this before in like a Q&A on my story as well as in one of my earliest posts, but my overall favorite Yu-Gi-Oh card is Banisher of the Radiance. Similar to some other Yu-Gi tubers choices or Yu-Gi-Oh players in general's choices and some of mine that I mentioned previously, this is my favorite Yu-Gi-Oh card because of the story behind it. I remember vividly pulling this from a pack from Walgreens, and this was my first ever ultimate rare. I didn't even know ultimate rare cards were a thing, so imagine my shock when I pulled this card and it was not only shiny like an ultra rare with ultra rare lettering, but it had the embossed, like this is one of the ultra rares where it has these super details of like the spirals in it and stuff. It's just such a beautiful ultimate rare for a time. You know how like watching anime you want to feel like the chosen one? That was like my spirit monster back in the day. Banisher of the Radiance is definitely a decent card and its effect is really cool, and way back in the day I used to try to put it in any deck I could, whether it hindered me or not, but ultimately that is definitely my favorite Yu-Gi-Oh card. Thank you guys so much for watching this. I feel like this is probably a very long video for something that most people just like posted on Twitter. I saw Dzeeff make a video basically doing this, and I found it entertaining, and I asked on Twitter if other people would like to see me make a video on it, and no one explicitly said no, so here you go. This was overall very fun, and I recommend, if you're a Yu-Gi-Oh player, sitting down, looking at this template, and even if you don't plan on posting it, just kind of think, like go through and choose your top choices, because that might kind of tell you something about yourself as a Yu-Gi-Oh player. Thank you so much for watching, and if you like Yu-Gi-Oh, please consider subscribing to my channel. I'm JC Theater Yu-Gi-Oh. See you in the next one.